Michigan's coordinator spoke to the media to discuss where their sides of the ball are in fall camp, and the Wolverines got a commitment from a recruit that certainly is not going to please the recruitniks on this Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Thursday. We are back in doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group, and we are back and doing the whole shebang. Deep into fall camp, 7 practices in. Let's get into it. So we spoke to Sherrone Moore and Jesse Minter, the offensive and defensive coordinators respectively, and got some insight as to where they see their units at. Now, let's take the quick 30,000-foot view of what I kind of gather from either side of the ball. Now, it's never a situation where I think that the coaches are generally going to come out and be like, oh, man, it's not looking very good, you guys. And certainly that's not where we would expect Michigan to be at the moment either, right? Because this is a Michigan team that returns a ton of talent. It's ranked number 2 in the country according to the coaches poll at USA Today Sports, the mothership for me. And it certainly has a feeling like this could be the year. You look at the schedule, look at all these things, it all kind of works out. That said, I feel like there is a confidence beyond that. Now, when you talk to either of the coordinators, there's a common denominator that they both had kind of mentioned. Well, 2 of them. One is obviously Jim Harbaugh, but Jim Harbaugh has not necessarily had the best year every single year, right? Like just won the Big Ten for the first time 2 years ago. You know, good 6-7 years into his tenure at Michigan. So he's one, but the other is Ben Herbert. I'll share an anecdote about Ben Herbert. I don't know if I this is an outside thing. So many of you know that I am a Second Amendment guy. And that's I've mentioned here on the podcast that I've spent just a little bit of time with Mozzie Smith up at the range. But one time I was up there and I was talking to the head trainer, and he was like, Ben Herbert comes in here every now and again. And he said, I want you to turn me into John Wick. And that he's been attacking it with that type of enthusiasm. Why do I bring up this random anecdote? Well, it's because he has the same zeal for himself wanting to get better as the way he brings it to the entire team. And we heard that from both Jesse Minter and Sherrone Moore. It's Ben Herbert is kind of that bottom line. He's what gives them a base. Now, Herbert did come aboard in 2018. And certainly there were some good things and bad things that have happened in the interim between then and 2021 when things kind of turned around. I mean, that's 3 years of repertoire. But I don't think there's any denying with the current team the type of impact that he has had. So I think that is important to note. But I definitely feel like there is a little bit of a swagger with these coaches, right? Jesse Minter entering year 2. And it really feels like, okay, I know what I got. And to some degree, in a weird sense, it feels like the defensive side of the ball is the one that's getting more hype in some ways. And I don't know, maybe it's because we have more questions about the defensive side of the ball, right? We want to know about that second cornerback. We want to know about the edge rush. Whereas we look at offense and it's kind of like, we know what you are and we expect you to be really good, right? Like there wasn't a lot of questions about Blake Corum. There was 1 question total about Blake Corum, 1 total about Donovan Edwards, none, I don't believe, about JJ McCarthy. So I think maybe it's a little bit more of a known commodity, but I think when we look at this defense and its capabilities, the talent that there is, it's really kind of tantalizing. And when you hear him talk about the pass rush, like, listen, we got 4 guys. We got 4 guys that are ready to go in that rotation. And he said maybe a 5th in TJ Guy. I like hearing that name, especially because he's the guy that recruitniks we're not ever really going to get totally behind, right? 3-star guy from Massachusetts. Yeah, felt like a Don Brown special, even though he came on officially made it to campus after Don Brown was gone, but he was recruited by Don Brown. So that's the type of thing that you that I root for those guys, right? That recruiting people are like, yeah, I don't know about that guy, right? So I get excited when I hear that guy's doing good. But who are the other four? He didn't even have to say. He said, you guys know who we're talking about. Jalen, who we had very, very high praise for. Jalen Harrell says he feels like he's taking that next step forward. Derek Moore, he had some really high praise for as well. Just said like he really likes where he is in his second year. Obviously, Braden McGregor and Josiah Stewart, who says, hey, that he can be involved in the run game. Now, he did bulk up a little bit. We talked about that on the last episode, but he did bulk up a little bit. He says it's the leverage that he plays with that makes him so dangerous on top of it all. And those are the outside guys. Chris Jenkins is getting the same type of hype, if not maybe even a little bit more than what Mozzie Smith did. And he said the moment he came back, it was all about, it's like he could have been a day 2 guy. He could have been a second or third round pick. He came back because he said, I want to be a first round draft pick. I want to solve the issues that I maybe have that NFL teams are going to look at and say, all right, let's fix those. I want to play over 300 pounds. I want to get my pass rush going. He said he has been obsessed with it. So those are all really good things. The cornerback situation still seems to be, it doesn't sound like it's something that's going to get solved in week 1. He said that he likened it to Jim Harbaugh with the quarterback competition last year. It's like this might get settled week 2, week 3, week 4. Really likes Josh Wallace, says like he is a guy who's good to go. Like he said everyone outside this building's talking about, well, he played for UMass, so the competition. Now we went through the competition and I found it mostly wanting. But that was kind of a cursory glance, right? Texas A&M really only last year and then 2 years ago, 2 teams didn't play that great against them. I think it was Florida State and I can't remember the other one. But they really like where he's at. They think that he is more than capable and that he's a pro. He called him, he's a pro. But he said like, I like where a lot of these guys are. Jaden McBurrows and Marion Walker mentions that it's a mental component that they're still trying to figure out. But he says he feels like they are working towards having those 5 DBs, and he says it can be a combination of guys. There's some safeties that can play nickel. You can slide Mikey over. There's, we got guys that can play inside, can play outside. He mentioned names like Keon Sabb. He mentioned Makari Page as being one of those types of guys. So that they have a lot. And he likened it to like Kyle Hamilton for the Baltimore Ravens, like a big thumping nickel. Like that's an opportunity that Michigan has. And then he talks about with Baltimore, like we're sharing ideas. Me and Mike McDonald, we're like every day. Hey, did you improve upon that thing that we were already doing? Yeah. Oh, and then I saw something you did. Yeah, we're working on this. Okay, cool. So it's a constant interface between Jesse Minter and that, and it feels like the personnel is right there. Embarrassment of riches at linebacker. They really like where they're at. They said the goal is for in the first half of the first game to play 26 players. They played 22 last year. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I think I'm probably more excited for the offensive side of the ball because it has the potential of being explosive, but the defense, for all of the talk about, it's Jim Knowles' second year, you guys. Jim Knowles, he's year 2. It's Jesse Minter's year 2 as well. And he had a better defense than Jim Knowles did last year. Just saying. With players that weren't as highly regarded in the recruiting surfaces. So I am interested to see what this looks like. Just like anyone else. And man, I'm just getting myself hyped up over the defense. I think defense at Michigan hypes me up more than offense, probably because it's usually how it goes. Anyhow, let's go ahead and move on. And we are going to continue by talking about Sherrone Moore. So get ready for that. Anyway, before we do that, and I made the mistake of closing my window. So let's just go back here. All right, there we go. Football season is about to kick off. And guess what? FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, so we're talking about the corporate sport, but I mean, you can do the fun sport, the real sport, the college football. But when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you are going to get bonus bets back every single time they win in the regular season. So go ahead and just smash the Detroit Lions. I'm just kidding, you guys. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. You can then use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, so much more. That's what makes it so exciting. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. All right, we are back and doing it. Like I say at the top, let's talk about Sherrone Moore. Apologies for no Wednesday. I know we want to double up. This is a really difficult week. I was a little bit under the weather yesterday, so I couldn't really do a heck of a lot. But also running around like a chicken with my head cut off, getting preparation for the season, going to visit Canada Mike and Danielle in near Toronto tomorrow. We have a press conference tomorrow. I had the press conference today. So getting me in a chair in my own house is a difficult thing. So I think the plan will be I will have my camera. I'm bringing my camera equipment. If we're not doubling up, we'll at least get our 5 in this week, and then we'll have plenty to talk about. We'll get Jim Harbaugh next week and all of that. We'll make up for the missed one last week. We'll make up for the missed one this week. That will happen. Whether it happens on the weekend, I don't know for sure. We're going to try to make it happen on the weekend. But y'all know me. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes it does. Oftentimes it doesn't. We're going to try to make that work. Let's talk about Sherrone Moore and what he had to say before we get to the recruiting news of the day. Like I said, not a lot of talk about J.J. McCarthy. Not a lot of talk about Blake Corum. Not a lot of talk about Donovan Edwards. I asked him about Roman Wilson. And he said, hey, the guy that you've seen look really good at times, that's the guy he is all the time. So look forward to that. Really not much more to that. Didn't talk about Cornelius Johnson. Did discuss the freshmen and just stringing them all together. Well, you mentioned Darius Clemens, Tyler Morris as being where they want them to be. He mentioned Carmelo English, Frederick Moore, and Samaj Morgan as being guys that are out there making elite plays in camp. Didn't mention any backup running backs. So that deduces what did we talk about? Well, obviously a lot of offensive line, a lot of pass run balance, right? Like that type of stuff. So it will be interesting to see what this season looks like from an offensive perspective, because you have a group that can achieve more, I think, than maybe any other Michigan team before it. Will it? Maybe. There have been some good offenses, right? We used to think of Michigan's offense as, whoever was the quarterback, you knew was going to the league. Top receivers, you knew were going to the league. Running back, you knew was going to the league. You knew the entire offensive line, the tight ends. But it was a different style of offense in college football at that time compared to now, right? Like what Michigan did last year is something that you would look at Michigan 20 years ago and say that tracks. But when you look at it in the grand scheme of college football right now, you look at it and say, well, that's, even though they were like a top 20-ish offense, they were like 23, I can't remember offhand, I'm not going to pull it up. But they weren't really being talked about as being like that as an offense to contend with. 2021, technically the most explosive offense in the country as far as plays that were like 50 yards or more. Didn't get talked about like that. It's like, oh, they're just going to line up and they're just going to try to run it at you and they're going to get their 3 yards and they're just going to army their way down the field. But this group has the potential of doing more, which when you get into a lot of these hypotheticals, right, that's where I don't know, right? Maybe that's why we haven't done the mailbag in a while. Because my hypotheticals will be a lot of I don't know on the offensive side of the ball. Will Blake have 1,500 yards rushing? Will Donovan have 1,500 or 2,000 yards of all-purpose? And, how many receivers will, be above that? It's somewhere between 500 and 1,000 yards receiving. And how many yards will J.J. McCarthy throw for? your guess is as good as mine. They can sit there and say they want to be balanced and that is the plan, to be balanced. Doesn't always mean that that's how that ends up working out, right? Last year, I'm sure that we could look back and see some fall camp bluster that would say some similar things, but no one knew that Blake Corum was going to be as good as he ended up being. And I know there are probably a lot of you saying, Mr. Isaiah, there certainly I believed. Listen, Blake Corum broke out right out of the gates in 2021. And yeah, he had an injury and everything, but it was Haskins was kind of the clear in the latter half of the season guy. Even when Blake was healthy, Haskins had the ability. He was the guy that you knew, like, they need 3 yards. They can hand it off to him and he's going to get you 6. Blake Corum, all last fall, we were talking about who's going to be that third running back because we know that Blake Corum cannot do that. Turns out he can. He just had to add a different element of to his game. It was different than how Hassan Haskins did it. It was a little more shifty. It was a little more Barry Sanders-esque. It was still power. It was just a different kind of power. Not talking about schematically. I'm talking about in his legs, right? Whereas Hassan Haskins fell forward, he would fall forward for that extra yard or two. Blake Corum's making guys miss, churning the legs a little bit. He wasn't carrying the piles the same way that Hassan Haskins was. So that changed the game. Because he came out there, he looked the way he did against like Washington and then just continued to do it. And then it was like, well, why would we stop them from doing that? Well, the interesting thing that Sherrone Moore said is like, we know we need to be able to pass the ball and show that we can pass the ball. We know we need to do it for recruiting, although he said winning is the best recruiting tool. We know we need to do it just in general, though. We need to be able to go out there and show that we can pass the ball. I think it is important for recruiting because I think you can win, but if Army's winning, you're still, it's still not going to grab a top pro passing quarterback. We'll get guys who can run the ball because that's the style of play that they have. I think it's important to prove that, hey, we as Michigan can go out there and throw it as good as anybody. Is J.J. McCarthy going to be Joe Burrow? I mean, that's a high bar to clear. No one else has, ever. So I'm curious to see where they go with that. All of the other talk, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it was the offensive line. Of course, you've got 10 guys. They said maybe even up to 12, and that could be a part of that. I think we'll reserve offensive line talk for a whole episode. It warrants that. Tight end, he mentioned Brock Bowers and said Colston Loveland can be better. Didn't say it in those words, but insinuated it. Said, he could be the best tight end in the country. I know there's a guy down there in Georgia that everyone talks about, but Colston Loveland can be as good as he wants to be. A.J. Barner, complete tight end. Great against the run, great against the pass. Or great in the pass, not against. Great in the run, I don't know. We're mixing up our offense and defense, but nonetheless, a lot of talent, a lot of great stuff happening there. So, offense maybe doesn't have as much to talk about. We had Sherrone for about 4 minutes less than we had Jesse Minter, but there are a lot less questions there. And weirdly, we weren't going to get a lot about the places where we have questions. That's more of a we need to see it type of thing. So excited to 3 weeks, just over 3 weeks, and we will get to. All right, let's move on to the recruiting news of the day. We've got Michigan's got another recruit, another addition, another commitment. No cheeseburgers were purchased for this one, I don't believe. But let's talk about that and why the recruitniks are probably big mad right now. All right, Michigan got a commitment. As I was finishing the transcriptions for Jesse Minter and Sherrone Moore, Michigan went out and nabbed a commitment that's 28th of the cycle. Let's see, where does that put Michigan? 6th in the country. So Michigan is now behind. And keep in mind, some of these guys were re-ranked lower, and that's what happens. But they've got 19 4-stars and 9 3-stars. That's the most 4-stars of anyone in the country that Michigan has. And when you combine 5 and 4, there's only one team in the country that has more, and that's Georgia, which has 26 commits, 3 5-stars, 17 4-stars, and 6 3-stars. So they have an average 93.49 compared to Michigan, who's sitting at 90.48. Unfortunately, the highest per average is Ohio State, who has 19 commits and is at a 93.54. But Michigan's right in there, right? Like some of the teams that are around there that hovering around are LSU as a similar star rating, but with 5 less commits, but 16 4-stars, 7 3-stars. Penn State has a little bit higher per, 16 and 8. Notre Dame is barely above Michigan in that regard, but obviously ranked lower at 22 commits, 14 and 8. So certainly Michigan was probably playing with a higher deck than it had until it brought in its latest. This is not to impugn the player. It's to impugn the recruit nicks, more so. Now, will this player become anything? I don't know. But it's Jeremiah Lowe. He's a 5'11", 170-pound cornerback out of Lexington, Kentucky. Has a Kentucky offer and only has 4 Power 5 offers: Kentucky, Boston College, West Virginia, and Michigan. We've got Marshall in there too. 3-star rated at 1,089 in the country, the 96th best cornerback, and the 9th player from the state of Kentucky. So, of course, that ain't going to be met with a lot of love, right? Especially when it was like, well, Michigan's going to get one of the 2 Ohio guys that Ohio State wanted. Terrion Nichols is on, potentially on board. Jameer Grimsley. You strike out with a lot of that. Maybe I think recruiting strategy probably not great, but you don't know if you can't get him. If you don't try, you'll never get him if you don't try. Right? Then that's just how it is. Of course, I have some thoughts on that I can't share on camera, but it is what it is. So on paper, not fantastic. But remember, like the getting an upper echelon guy in college football is a different deal. And especially with the thought of Aaron Scott, he can come in and start opposite Will Johnson day one. And this is clearly not going to be that, barring something unforeseen. Now, that said, there are some good rumblings about Cam Calhoun, who was not ranked this low, but was a 3-star out of Ohio. That committed this last year. It was an early enrollee. I mean, he had a pick 6 to start spring ball, and it was off to the races for him. But a guy like Jeremiah Lowe kind of feels like, all right, SEC country, not a lot of teams going after him. Maybe he's a little unheralded, but with some development. Just don't write anybody off. I mean, that's the thing, is there's always people that are writing off some of these players. So for posterity, and some of these aren't going to work out great, we can look back and see that I think going back to 2022 is not, some of those guys, they're second-year guys. They're not necessarily, we don't know necessarily what they are or whatever. And man, 24/7 site can be glitchy at times. I was trying to go to 2021 and it's like, nope. So we'll go to 2020. And Chris Jenkins, for instance. Chris Jenkins was a 3-star, ranked 513th in the country. When he committed, I know that's not 1089, but when he committed, no one was out there writing articles like, this dude is going to change the game for Michigan football. That wasn't happening, right? Jalen Harrell. People were a little more excited about Jalen Harrell. He was a 3-star, 4-star in the composite, but like 294. Let's see if we can. We'll go back instead of forward. I want 2021. It doesn't look like it's going to work on this. For whatever reason, it's decided that it doesn't work on the site. 2019. The only problem with some of the bottom guys is that they haven't really worked out in one way or another, transfers and such like that. Mike Morris was. See, they've upped it, the 3 to 4 star. It used to be like cutting off at 379, so he was a 3-star, but he's now a 4-star or whatever. He was one of the lower ranked guys. Mike Sainris still is another one that was a 3-star guy at 589 in the country. Flipped from Virginia Tech. No one was really writing home about him until he arrived, and suddenly people were starting to write home about him, and then people didn't care, and then obviously last year made him beyond a fan favorite. 2018 is obviously where we're going to live. I mean, that's the best one to go to. Jake Moody doesn't count. Kickers are never rated highly, right? But Ronnie Bell. What do you think Ronnie Bell was rated? Wide receiver. You're going to say, surely not 1089. That's too low. Well, Ronnie Bell, who had all of one offer, 1,473 in the country. Turned out pretty good, right? Turned out pretty good. What about Hassan Haskins? Hassan Haskins was obviously got some legal trouble right now, but he'll never buy another drink in Ann Arbor after getting 5 touchdowns against Ohio State, just being an all-around beast on the playing field. 975 in the country. Out of Eureka, Ohio, had 9 offers reported by 24/7 Sports. 2 Power 5 offers, Michigan and Purdue. So, why do I do this? Well, let's do one more. Luke Schoonmaker. Maybe. There we go. Luke Schoonmaker, I remember people being angry the day he committed. It was the second day of Big Ten Media Days in 2017. 796 in the country. Ends up being a second-round pick in the NFL. So that said, I mean, these guys are all developmental, right? Hassan didn't play in 2018. Ronnie did a little bit, but not really. A little bit. He burned his red shirt, but it wasn't like a factor. You can only trust the rankings so much. So if you're out there being down on it, being like, how do you feel about him compared to Aaron Scott and Bryce West? Well, not great. That doesn't mean he won't turn out to be better. I don't think Michigan fans would trade Hassan Haskins for Travion Henderson, right? Therefore, there you go. Definitely a different tale of rankings. That's going to do it for us today. The plan is, and remember on this show, plans change on a dime. The plan is to get a show out early tomorrow. Got an 11-ish press conference tomorrow, so we're gonna try to do one early tomorrow before I go. I will be very sleepy. I will be incoherent, but we will do the best we can. Then if I can do another one on Friday night, certainly no promises on that. We'll try. And then hopefully do one on Saturday morning after an early afternoon before Canada Mike and Danielle and Chris Ballas go completely buck wild. So that's the hope and the plan. Mike, Danielle, I hope you're listening to this since, you know. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll be back very soon. Peace.